Welcome again to our series, How to Pray. My name is Avraham Apatow, and we're continuing with our discussion of Maaseh Bereshit, the workings or the secrets of creation. And we've been speaking about this in the context of the blessings of the Shema declaration, the declaration of our faith. Now, in the previous presentations, we've been unfolding the cosmic picture and structure of how creation actually works. And this is the picture that's described within the flow of these introductory blessings to the Shema. It begins with a blessing over light, the creation of light, and its complement darkness. And then it goes through how light and wisdom and intelligence fill the universe, a beautiful description of the celestial creations. The Mo'orot is the word in Hebrew, the illuminating bodies, the planets, the stars, the constellations, and then a description of the creation of the angels, the different levels of angels, and the praises they say to God. Now, as we explained, the first part of our prayer, the Psuke de Zimra, is on an earthly level. Those are praises to God from the very human aspect of life. Now we're in a different section of the prayers, and we're contemplating the heavens. So naturally, it's very uplifting, these poetic descriptions. And I think when we read them, we appreciate the beauty of the language of the Torah, the beauty of our prayers. But it's very important also to ask why it's written in this structure, how all these little pieces fit together, because they form a majestic picture of understanding the very dynamics of creation, and most importantly, our place in this picture. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So when we look at this picture of the angels and the celestial bodies, what's essential to realize is that this is how the ancient peoples, all the pagan ancient nations, this is how they understood the workings of nature. Nature and all its blessings and all its power and all its challenges. All these activities of our world depended on a source from above. They recognized and were deeply sensitive to the influence of the sun and the moon, and not only the sun and the moon, but the stars and all the planets, upon the life force and energies of nature. We described how the angels are the spiritual powers that bring the infinite life source from God into our finite world. And that activity is complemented by the workings and the role of the celestial bodies. Now, this is the reason why ancient peoples looked towards the celestial bodies as gods, because they were extremely sensitive to the functionings of nature, much more sensitive than we are today. And they realized the effect not only that the sun and the moon have, but all the constellations, and this is what we call astrology. Now, in the modern world, science completely rejects this idea that there is spiritual influence from heavenly bodies. But we're talking from a religious perspective and a spiritual perspective, where this is the absolute reality of life. And just as a side note, it's very interesting to me when I'm reading ancient texts and I see the greatest, most eminent people of reason and science in the ancient world discuss astrology as an absolute fact. They acknowledge that it's undeniable that through astrological knowledge, people can predict and foresee certain events in nature. And maybe I should just add that a lot of Jewish people look towards Maimonides, the Rambam, and saying, well, he completely rejected astrology. A good friend of mine points out that we can reject the idea of absolute ability to predict the future, but even the Rambam, he believes, does not reject the idea that astrological information gives us a guide to the possibilities and likelihood of the future. And so it's because of this sensitivity and this understanding of the influence of heavenly bodies and the angelic forces and higher intelligences and wisdom that worked through the celestial bodies that ancient peoples called the stars and planets gods. The Torah and the Jewish religion does not deny this picture of reality. What it denies is that these objects should be worshipped. The Torah and its greatest rabbis all acknowledge that there are angels. We acknowledge that the planets and stars have souls and intelligence, and that they're the channels of divine and godly influence through nature into our earthly realm. This is something that's accepted. The Torah explicitly says, as I pointed out, that these gods were given to other peoples to worship. What the Torah emphasizes is that the people of Israel shall only worship the one God. And a person has to really appreciate this picture, this cosmological theology of the ancient world, in order to really appreciate the prayers that we say every single day, because it is a description of that worldview. But after it's all put into the picture, our rabbis institute a blessing that makes it very clear where we stand. We say, Le'el Baruch Ni'amot Yitenu, to the blessed God now, and I'll just paraphrase, we're going to express our praises and songs, but at the same time we're going to acknowledge, as the blessing says, Ki hu levado po'el gevurot. This is the most important line. For he alone is the worker of the great acts that we see in nature. So after describing the cosmological background for how God's power comes into the world, the sages explicitly say here that we acknowledge only God as the real source of all this power and manifestation of life force in the world. Although the planets may have influence on the success or failure of farming, on the acts of war, anger, and peace, the cycles of anger and peace in the world, even though the heavenly bodies may have influence on that, it's only God that determines when there's going to be success in our crops, when there's going to be liberation from enemies. He is the Adon Haniflot. He is the master of all wonders. And here is the beautiful conclusion. Hamechadesh b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh bereshit. So we've been discussing the ma'aseh bereshit, the workings of creation. And here the blessing concludes by saying, He alone renews each day, always, the workings of creation. So as we said, that the very breaking of dawn is a reacting of the creation of the entire universe. And just as God is responsible for the creation of the universe, all the activities of our day, all the flow of the cycles of life and the drama of life on every level, from the heavenly level to the animal kingdom, the earthly level, the plant level, and ultimately the human level, on all these levels, this is called the workings of creation, the drama and dynamics of life. God, every day, always, meaning in each moment, just as He created the whole universe, He is solely responsible for the workings of our world. And that's because He guides everything with His wisdom, His love, that is, His providence. And so the blessing concludes by saying we thank God for the majestic and uplifting, inspiring, joyful vision of the celestial world, which on a personal note I wish I could see, because of that is blocked today because of all the street lights, and I miss it so terribly. But the ancient peoples were so blessed to see it every moment, and it is the source of tremendous joy and inspiration to our souls, and we bless God and thank God for being the creator of these illuminating heavenly bodies. So after describing this picture of the workings of creation, the Maaseh Bereshit, the final paragraph is the blessing that Am Yisrael says about being chosen. In other words, this entire picture doesn't function mechanically. It depends on the activities of human beings below, our righteousness, our prayers, our connection to God. And that's why it begins, Ahavat Olam Ahavtanu. There's a love between Shemayim va'aretz, between the heavens and the earth, between God and man. This love is expressed by the giving of all the blessings that we receive and our thanks and our prayers below. This is our connection. This is our love. And this is such a beautiful and appropriate way to introduce the Shema blessing, which is that ultimate state and declaration of the unity of Am Yisrael with its God, the God of Israel. And we're going to describe this whole blessing and the role of Am Yisrael in the world, how it functions in this cosmic picture. And also, what is this notion of chosenness? And why is it placed right here as we approach the Shema blessing? This will be the subject of our discussion as we enter into the discussion of the declaration of the Jewish faith in Shema.